As Mary says, it's great to see so many of you here this evening, especially when it's such a lovely evening and you could be in the pub, but you're here listening to me instead. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming along. I'm Kieran Gleave. I'm a second-year PhD student at the Department of Archaeology here at the University of Cambridge. And my sort of research area that I'm looking at is industrial heritage, so namely how the industrial past informs a sense of identity amongst contemporary communities in Mill Road and also in Ancoats and New Islington in Manchester. Somebody still coming in? Okay. So as a part of my research, I am still trying to recruit local people to participate in my research, so I do a bit of shameless self-promotion here. I do have a couple of flyers out front. If you are interested in being interviewed as part of my research, please do take one, and fantastic stuff. Thank you very much to the Mill Road History Society for allowing me to talk this evening and for their help so far in facilitating my PhD project and affording me so many local connections with local people, so thank you very much. A couple of housekeeping notes before we properly get started. We're not expecting any fire drill this evening. If there is a fire, there are fire exits here and there and out there. I feel like an air hostess. Toilets are, if you've not been here before, toilets are out of that corridor to the left. There are 2 toilets there and refreshments as well. So we do have a refreshment break in between the talks. So the first hour is basically a talk on the industrial history of Mill Road, ranging from the 1830s through till the mid-20th century. Now, this is going to be quite a general talk as opposed to a bit of a specialist talk which just focuses on a specific site or industry in the Mill Road area. So it's only an hour long, like I say, so I don't have too long to talk about absolutely everything. This section of the talk ends with a selection of resources that if you're interested in Mill Road history yourself or conducting some research or in Cambridge history, I will signpost a couple of resources that you can use yourself. We're then going to have a 15-minute Q&A session / refreshment break, so if you don't want to ask any questions, just go and help yourself to some food and drink. That's perfectly fine. And then afterwards, we have a 45-minute workshop session where we're going to be moving from the industrial past to the de-industrial present, if you will. So we're going to be talking ideally about the role of the industrial past in creating a sense or upholding a sense of community today in the area. This is supposed to be more of a discussion amongst everybody as opposed to me just speaking with individual people, so it'd be good to try and get that sort of dialogue going. I did, when I advertised this, ask people to bring any objects with them. Has anybody brought any objects with them that would facilitate a discussion about the industrial past? 1, 2? Fantastic, that's more than I hoped for, so brilliant stuff, brilliant stuff. Okay, so we can talk about those afterwards. So, moving onwards. So this is the area that I'm going to be focusing on during this talk. As I said before, it's going to be following a chronology of the industrial history from around the 1830s through the 20th century. And handily for me, in preparing this talk, this industrial development of Mill Road broadly moves from west to east. So we're going to be having a journey chronologically through Mill Road's industrial history, but also spatially from west to east. So we're going to start out at number 1 with the Mill Road windmill, which, spoiler alert, that's where the name Mill Road comes from if you didn't already know that. We're then going to be talking about, at number 2, the Cambridge Union Workhouse and that sort of social history of the industrial past of Mill Road. We're then going to move to number 3, which is where we are right now. This is where we're stood right now, the site of the Eagle Foundry, and talk about some of the ironworking history of Petersfield. We're then, at number 4, going to talk about sort of smaller domestic industries in Petersfield, then cross over the bridge to the other side to talk about Red Russia and the social history of the railways, and then we're finally going to end up at the Romsey Cement and Lime Works and later the Cam Foundry. So, in preparing this talk, I thought that it was important first to actually clarify, if we're going to be talking about the industrial past, I think it's first important to talk a bit about what do I mean when I'm talking about industry in general. And I think from these definitions, and these were generated from just a quick Google search of industry definition, the top 3 definitions that came up. And they really highlight that there are two dimensions to industry that are really worth discussing. The first, as is highlighted in green, and I appreciate that there's a lot going on here, but the first is that industry is this heavy stuff, you know, mines, mills, manufactories, steam engines, the big heavy kit. And that's often what when we talk about the Industrial Revolution, that's often what we think about. But it's also important to remember that without people, without the social history and without the social background, industry wouldn't be possible. So I'm going to be talking about the bigger, heavier industries in Petersfield and Romsey, but also some of the smaller domestic industries which also emerged around that time, which really gave this area of Cambridge its flair and its identity today. So a good place to start when focusing on the history of any area is historic map evidence. And our first map takes us to 17th century central Cambridge. I've got a bit of an obsession with all things maps, so if you don't like maps, sorry, this is not the talk for you. There are going to be quite a few maps throughout this. But I chose this map. This is from John Speed's map from the counties. I've got the book here, the counties of Britain. If you want to look at the actual map itself during the break, please just do come and have a look at this. But I chose this map for two reasons. First, stylistically, it's fantastic. It's excessive in every way. It's you know, not to scale. It's not even orientated correctly. This way's north, so it's not a good map in an actual sense of mapping things. Stylistically, it's fantastic, but also it goes a long way to highlight that throughout most of its history, Cambridge is essentially the university settlement, the university market town, and you can see around the hinterland of Cambridge, a majority of it is agricultural settlement. Here, for example, at the bottom, this sort of wheat field thing, that's where Christ Peace is now. So this area of Cambridge Mill Road certainly wouldn't have existed in any sense other than a few sparse farmsteads and traces of agriculture. So there are plenty of maps that depict historic Cambridge in a university sense, but we don't really get any maps that depict the Mill Road area through until the early 19th century. And the first map that depicts this is the map of Cambridge, Plan of Town, 1835, 2 inches to 1 mile map. And this is the first to show both the university settlement in the middle, but also here where we have parish of Barnwell, this area here will go on to become what we know today as Mill Road. So if we zoom in on that, I've highlighted Mill Road as it was then. It wasn't really a road, it was more of a dirt track than anything else by this point. But interestingly, in the context of historic industry, and as I've just said before, there's the windmill which is present on this map. So this is the first stop that we will go to. Now, this is a very famous image. I'm sure that many of you have seen this before. If you do know what it is, don't say anything, but does anybody know where this picture is? Yep. Oh, anybody? Oh, sorry, anybody? It's Parker's Piece, yes, exactly. So if you were stood there today, you'd basically be looking at the swimming pool and that big multi-storey car park. So this is a cricket match on Parker's Piece, presumably between the 1830s and 1840s. And this is the first and only picture of the windmill to exist as far as I and anybody else is aware of. So you can't see it very well, and I've done my best to sort of highlight it in red there. So in a building report on the windmill, and I'll go on to talk about these building reports, I mean, Mary spoke about them a bit in her introduction, but in the building report on the windmill, Allan Brigham, Gordon Clark, and Peter Philby state that the mill could have had its origins as far back as the 13th century. And over the centuries, it was rebuilt as the wood deteriorated and rotted away, all this sort of stuff. And for a majority of its life, or the majority of the phases of the windmill, it was a wooden post mill. What is a wooden post mill, I hear you cry? Well, we are very lucky, we are very fortunate that we have just down the road, this is Bourne Windmill, which is located around 7 miles west of Cambridge, just south of Cambourne. And this is basically what this windmill would have looked like for a majority of its history. It's called a post mill, presumably because you have this big post at the back, so almost like opening a canal lock, you can sort of push the post and angle the entire windmill into the wind so you maintain a good flow of air so you can operate the grinding and milling machinery inside. However, it was rebuilt in brick between 1792 and 1796 by Charles Humphrey, which is what you can see depicted in this engraving. Depicted. I say that because you can't see it, basically. So, to sort of assist you, this is Green's Windmill in Nottinghamshire. This is a rough idea about what it would have looked like in this engraving here. By 1844, the windmill had been dismantled. Now, I'm not too sure. I think it was perhaps because Charles Humphrey got old and retired or something like that. It could be that, or it could be because it was struck by lightning, which killed a pig and injured a woman. Who knows? So all the building materials were put up for auction in 1844. And this is the end of the windmill, which represents this sort of proto-industrial agriculture of the Mill Road area. But the industrial rise of Mill Road was, in fact, just around the corner. So we move now down to the Cambridge Union Workhouse. Here highlighted on a cemetery map plan. So there's this plan in the archives of the University Library. Up here, there's depiction of the Mill Road Cemetery. But interestingly, you have here highlighted the workhouse. This is one of the first buildings to be erected on Mill Road, and it actually boasts the claim as being the oldest building on Mill Road, oldest surviving. That's a bit tenuous because actually, even though the frontage is still there, known as Ditchburn Place today, actually a majority of the workhouse doesn't exist anymore. It's essentially just a shell of what it used to be. The facade is still there, but all the actual original infrastructure and structure behind it is gone. So this was erected at a time when the area is still agricultural land, and you can see that on this plan. You know, some of the streets have begun to be laid out, but it's quite isolated actually. Before this, the care of the elderly, infirm, sick was the duty of the local church. However, in 1834, the Poor Law Amendment Act was passed, which grouped church parishes into unions, hence the name Cambridge Union Workhouse, which basically made looking after the poor more cost-effective. And here is an excerpt from the 1865 edition of the Post Office Directory of Cambridge, Norfolk and Suffolk, which gives quite a nice description of the workhouse, which was built in 1838 at a cost of around £6,500 and is a plain brick building capable of accommodating around 250 persons. Rather unethically, these people were referred to as inmates, unethical by today's standards, and these were segregated into classes. So you'd have the front of the workhouse here for the elderly and infirm men and women, the middle area here for small boys and girls, and then the rear of the workhouse would have been for able-bodied men and women. Able-bodied men and women would complete forced labour tasks between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. from Monday to Saturday every week. Men would crush up rocks for making roads, or they walk a treadmill to grind corn, and women would work in the segregated laundry room and wash house. Also, because it was still agricultural at the time, I believe a lot of the inmates were employed in harvesting potatoes in this sort of area of town here. Thank you, Helen, that was from you. So workhouses as institutions are really synonymous with the social history of the Industrial Revolution. So I would argue that the construction of the workhouse on Mill Road is the first step to the subsequent industrialisation of Mill Road, i.e. it's out of the centre of town, away from the university, where we can have all the nasty stuff, and it's away from people. The workhouse was operated until 1930, where it subsequently became a county infirmary and later a maternity hospital. And perhaps some of you were born in the maternity hospital. There we go, 1 person, 2 people, 3 people, 4, 5, there we go. Brilliant stuff. However, it was really the coming of the railway to Cambridge in 1845 that was the catalyst for this industrial growth. And I'm not going to focus on the railway too much at this point because it will crop up in later parts of the talk. But it's important to keep this in our minds. This sketch is from the Illustrated London News. I say that because this image is often used places and people don't cite it properly. So there you go. If you were looking for where that's from, there you are. It's also important to mention that even though Mill Road's industrial growth owes itself to the coming of the railway. Actually, many local trades and industries were put out of business or suffered because of the coming of the railway. So Warren and Phillips in 1987 in their publication state that the railway underpinned the local 1851 through 1854 depression, in which house prices fell, breweries closed, and there was a general depletion in land value. We now move to the real beginning. I know I've said the real beginning 3 times now, but this is, this is the real beginning of the industrialisation of Mill Road. And ironically, this doesn't actually begin in Mill Road. It starts with a fire in Market Hill, right in the centre of town. A contemporary newspaper clipping. A destructive fire broke out on Saturday night on the premises of Messrs. Headly, known as the Eagle Foundry at Cambridge. The fire threatened several of the surrounding establishments, but it was fortunately confined by great exertions to the spot on which it originated, where, however, it destroyed the property to a considerable amount. So there was an iron foundry slap bang in the centre of town where the market is today. The ironworks sets on fire. It's confined to the property. When the matter arises of let's rebuild this, there's obviously great protest from local people that, well, we can find it this time, but in the future we might not be able to. So the Headleys decide to move their iron foundry to this area of Cambridge. Again, another unclear map for you from 1859. So I've done my best to highlight where the iron foundry is now, and we are stood right now. This is part of the reason I wanted to have this here this evening, because this is the site of the ironworks. Well, maybe not right here, maybe about 20 metres that way, but close enough. Attracted mainly by the coming of the railway, which I've highlighted in yellow here. Now, again, from this map, you can't really tell a great deal about it other than it's a long rectangular structure with a knobbly bit on the end. So if we jump forward around 20 years to the 1880 Ordnance Survey map, we can see the site in a lot better detail. Especially with this closer view here, you can see how much the railway integrates with the site, the extent that the buildings are segregated up. You've got a pump, you've got a travelling crane and a well and a timber yard, another pump up there. So bear this map in mind because we're going to be coming back to this shortly. But what sort of stuff did the Headley Ironworks make? What things were made on this site? Well, for a start, they made big stuff. So on the left is the first and only steam engine to be manufactured in Cambridge. The fact that it's the first and only probably tells you something about its quality. Apparently, it wasn't very fast, couldn't pull very much, grossly inefficient with fuel. So it was very quickly retired and converted into a railway inspection vehicle. And this was built in 1849, I believe. They stick this big, the railway inspection vehicle is this sort of hearse-looking, I think it looks like a hearse anyway, this sort of glass box on the end, so you'd have railway line inspectors trundling up and down the line with this sort of thing. I think most interestingly, of the things that were manufactured here on the site, in 1853, a cast iron girder for a skew bridge for the Newmarket Extension Railway was cast on this site. And this used 6 tons imperial weight of liquid iron to cast, which was the largest object cast of iron in England until that time. And when I first read that, I was absolutely blown away, because if you would have said to me before I started researching this, Kieran, where was the largest cast iron objects in 1853? I'd say probably somewhere like Sheffield or Stoke or South Wales, where you have established iron founders. But no, it was right here where we're stood, 20 metres that way, that sort of thing. They also made stationary engines as well. So, and we've got an expert here, so if I say anything wrong, then do correct me on the Headley engine. But this is the last surviving stationary engine that Headley manufactured that survives in the world. This is just at the Cambridge Museum of Technology, and this was built in the 1860s. If people haven't been to the Technology Museum before, this does run on steam days. We've got a very sad duck which is strapped to the flywheel, and it gets spun around constantly. That's basically to demonstrate the concept of rotations per minute to kids, and also because we hate rubber ducks, so we like to torture them as well. But here's a schematic diagram of what the engine would have looked like. So they built big stuff, but they also would have manufactured smaller things out of iron, so sort of agricultural machinery, this sort of stuff. And the other week, I was trawling around in the archives. I say archives, it's a shipping container, at the Cambridge Museum of Technology, and I came across these. This is basically a mould for a fence post, I believe, fence post or bollard. And you can see here J.I. Headley, Mill Road, Cambridge. So I think there are still some of these that survive around in obscure places. I think a lot of them were taken away probably in the war and melted down for the war effort, but they are sporadically located around town. We're now going to move from iron to this. And again, I know that some of you know this, but does anybody know what this is? What these rocks are? Coprolite, everyone knows, fantastic. It's not actually coprolite. I think 5% of what we know as coprolite is actually, for want of a better word, dinosaur poop. I think a lot of it is actually the exoskeletons of various creatures from hundreds of millions of years ago. I'm not a geologist, as you can tell. But we go back to the map that I told you that we'll be going back to, and the eagle-eyed among you, that's the first and only pun you're going to get from me this evening. They had a coprolite mill on site, which I've highlighted here in green. So you can see this is the extent of the coprolite mill. This blue square would presumably have been an open-sided shed or something like that, so that railway engines can come in through the line here and go inside. So why did the Headleys have a coprolite mill on their site? I'm sure the burning question of the evening. So this is a map of all the coprolite fields, coprolite mining areas that was put together in Gove's coprolite mining rush book. And you can see here, right where the red star is in the middle, that's where the Eagle Foundry site would have been roughly in relation to the coprolite mining fields. So it was really, really central to this emerging industry. So a bit about the history of coprolite mining. The local mining of coprolite is attributed to a chap called John Ball in Burwell in 1851, where the story goes, John has a field full of turnips, and he's looking around and he goes, these turnips are growing really well over here, but his other field, his turnips weren't doing so well. So he decides to dig it. It's probably some poor local lad in his employment that he says, get down there and dig that bloody hole. But anyway, he digs this hole and he discovers coprolite basically in this, in one of his fields. And I don't know how he came upon this idea, but it was then crushed and mixed with acid. And this basically created a super fertilizer of sorts. So this is really, really handy in the context of mid-19th century Britain, when you've got booming industrial populations and this great stress on farms and agriculture to keep up with the growing population. So really locally, mining began in Colden's Common in 1858, and it became a massive industry in Cambridgeshire that didn't actually last very long. As you can see from the map down there, it only really lasted to any significant extent for around 40 years before all the veins were excavated. So the coprolite mining process itself, I'll just run through that very quickly. So you're a landowner in the 19th century. You suspect that you have coprolite on your land. What do? You employ coprolite prospectors to come into your land. They will dig a couple of test pits. If they find any coprolite, they will, which usually occurs naturally in veins about 8 to 9 feet down. I don't know what that is in meters, probably 2.5 meters or something like that. And this was basically chased. So you'd have these veins of coprolite running in a linear fashion. You dig them out, chase it along, excavate them out, and then you'd fill in the soil behind you that you'd excavated, kind of like a worm when it digs or eats the soil or whatever a worm does. This was then washed on site. So you'd have a lot of clay attached to the coprolite, and that makes it very inefficient to transport it, because you've got a lot of the weight, or half of the weight, still comes from the clay that's attached to it. So you'd have these temporary wash mills that were set up to clean the clay from the coprolite, and then this was taken away on these sort of temporary railways. So they'd basically just lay down track in a very rudimentary manner. You'd have a small dinky locomotive that would haul the wagons away to your nearest coprolite mill. And this is perhaps foreshadowing the closure of the Headley Foundry. But in an advert in the Cambridge Chronicle on the 8th of February 1887, this advert is put up when the Eagle Foundry dissolves or is sold off. And this is the list of kit that they basically have with the coprolite mill. 4 mills, 4 pairs of stones, crushing rolls, fan chambers, elevators, troughs, staging, etc., etc. Several furnaces, boilers, and around 160 feet of wrought iron shafting with pulleys and supports. So it's very clear that a lot is known about the actual mining of coprolite. A lot of books have been done about this, talks have been done, but I think going back to the map that we had, there's not actually very much which appears to, information that appears to exist about the actual milling of the coprolite itself. So I've searched high and low in preparing this talk for information about the coprolite mill itself, and there's nothing. Really interestingly, the Headleys also manufactured coprolite milling equipment themselves, and you'd normally expect in a trade directory somewhere there to be an illustration of some coprolite mining equipment. There are no photographs, no sketches, nothing. So this is the next best thing I can do for you this evening, which is Shirley's Bone and Flint Mill in Stoke-on-Trent. And milling bone and milling coprolite are very similar processes. Bone is incredibly hard, obviously, and needs to be crushed down using mechanical force. So does coprolite. Coprolite is also incredibly hard and requires mechanical assistance in order to make its milling commercially viable. This is sort of, I imagine, what the coprolite mill here would have looked like. It wasn't a massive building, so you'd probably have, these drive shafts, bevel gears, which then lead into sort of crushing rollers, which were described in the advert, which would roll around this sort of, these sorts of stone trough things almost. I imagine you'd load coprolite into there, perhaps. So I imagine that's what the coprolite would have looked like. The coprolite industry runs through mainly in a Cambridge context until around 1904, when all the surface veins had really been exhausted and cheaper coprolite was being imported, or coprolite fertilizer is being imported from New York and New Jersey, which basically is the final nail in the coffin for the local coprolite industry. So it came out of nowhere, was a massive local industry, and then it basically vanished in the course of a decade. And there's not very much left of it at all now. As I said with the advert, the Eagle Foundry packed up here after 40 years of Mill Road in 1887 when James Headley retires, and the business site and machinery is purchased and sold off in various parts. So we've spoken about the big stuff. I said in the introduction that we'd be talking about smaller industries as well locally, the smaller domestic industries. And really this area of Cambridge, Petersfield, has got an incredible amount of smaller domestic industries located in a very small area, relatively speaking. So these are the sort of things that I could find through my research. So there's a mineral waterworks on Willis Road, construction and timber merchants, there's smithing and metalworking, brewing, knitting, laundering, there's a sausage factory, interestingly, rather humorously, and dairies as well. And you see here, these are adverts in the 1911 trade directory, Kelly's trade directory. So there's a lot of stuff going on locally, a lot of smaller scale stuff. And this is owed significantly to the development of this area as a residential area of Cambridge. So the development of Sturton Town, and Helen Weinstein has done an incredible amount of work on Sturton Town in this, so I won't go over this too much. But essentially, between the 1860s and 1880s, there's a great swathe of residential development which takes over this area of town, and this gives way basically to the rise of lots of these smaller local industries. So as a part of my PhD research, I'll skip that bit. As a part of my PhD research, I've had to put together a bit of a historic background chapter for the actual thesis. So to sort of assist me in sort of processing what actually exists in the area, I put together this quite rudimentary map which outlines the different industries that existed locally at this time. This is the 1920 Ordnance Survey map. There's still quite a lot to be added to this. As I've been preparing this talk for this evening, I've discovered a lot more stuff that I didn't know about before this. So this is incomplete now. There needs to be more things added to it. And of course, when you've got domestic industries, where they're in people's houses and stuff, you can't plot every single house, but this is the bigger, small industries anyway. Thanks must go to Robin Mansfield for walking me through when we went on a bit of a walking tour of this area of town, and did a fantastic job of showcasing what was going on locally. So we'll start from the top and work down to the bottom. So in the blue up here, you have the ARC knitting works on or factory on Abbey Walk, and this had a shop on 12 Mill Road where Arjuna is today. Admittedly, in doing my research for this, I've not really been able to find too much out about the knitting work. So if anybody does know any more stuff about this, then please just do flag me down at the end. It would be fantastic to know a bit more about this. We move further down, and it's not very clear, but this says metalworks on the Ordnance Survey map. So moving down, we have W.E. Cox, engineer and iron founder, are present on the site in around 1910. And there's a fantastic publication or series of publications put together by Sarah Payne, who did these fantastic oral history interviews in the 1980s. And it's really nice to know that somebody actually cared enough back then to think, oh, well, people living in the town part of Cambridge, their perspectives are something and experiences are something which is worth actually recording and noting. But in one of her interviews she did with a Leslie Wallace of number 175 of Sturton Street, Leslie is recorded as saying of the metalworks, across the road towards Milford Street was a small factory known as the Tin Factory at numbers 152 to 156. Throughout the working day, a noisy clatter, din and rattle was produced, and pots and pans, kettles and various household articles were the end result. It was mainly staffed by girls. We always stopped to peer into this fascinating place whenever the doors were usually left open. And after this, you have, after the metalworks, sorry. I thought somebody had a question then. After the metalworks ceased, it was taken over by Robert C. Brown, who operated a hardware and general suppliers business, and he also delivered paraffin oil, and that's his van in the top left-hand corner up there. Below this, in green, you have the Werboys Brewery here, and of course you have Dale's Brewery, which is a familiar landmark on Gwyder Street today in Mill Road. But yeah, so there were two breweries in this part of Cambridge. So Werboys Brewery, which had 4 separate iterations of brewing on site between 1874 and 1923. And really, even today, a couple of 100 odd years later, there are still an incredible amount of pubs local in this area, especially on the Petersfield side. There are incredible amounts of pubs. So you've got a shed load of pubs, you've got 2 breweries, and the story goes that this is basically because of the poor water quality and sanitation back in the day where you'd brew things. When I was in the Museum of Cambridge this week, I was looking around and trying to take some photos of different stoneware jugs and stuff. It said that to produce the beer, the brewers would basically dig shafts down around 150 feet to get to the green sand layer where there would be clean water. So I don't know perhaps why. Maybe it's a bit of an old wives' tale that the only reason that there are so many pubs and stuff in this area of Cambridge is because there's poor water quality. I'm sure that's certainly a factor, but I wouldn't say that that's the only reason. Again, perhaps with the Headleys, perhaps it's because you've got the railway and you can get your stuff in and out quite quickly and you can transport it around to various places. In yellow here, you have the Kerridge and Shaw building contractors, joiners and shopfront manufacturers, and the Kerridge Close sign is basically the only homage to it that you would come across today, to my knowledge. You have also on 17 Sturton Street, you have a stables where the Cooperative Society would have kept their horses because they would have had things near the Beehive Centre as it is today. Like I say, with Dale's Brewery as well, you have 3 brewers on site between 1874 and 1958. And as you might have seen on the previous slide, here Dale's won the World Championship Cup for brewing in 1911, and for many years they had a big replica of this trophy on the roof of the basically where Hot Numbers is today. For many years they had this giant trophy adorning the roof. Go back to this map again. So we have further south here, we have the Cambridge Corporation Yard, which is where we are today. This is probably what the majority of you will know the site as being, the Cambridge Corporation Yard or the Council Depot. This is based on this map. It doesn't appear that any of the Eagle Foundry buildings survived. It seems that I could be wrong, that's just based on what I see on the map anyway, but it seems that they basically tore everything down and rebuilt it again. We also note here on the very bottom in red the extent of the railway. And again, it might not be too clear on this map, but there's a photo on the next slide which really does a good job to illustrate the size of the railway. This is just along Devonshire Road where that new development is getting put in just over near the bridge. And last but certainly not least in terms of local Petersfield industries was the laundry industry as well, which though it was spread across Cambridge and in areas like Arbury, Mill Road and Petersfield had significant number of laundresses which would have done sheets and linens for the Cambridge colleges, but also presumably for local people as well. I would imagine probably makes sense from a commercial perspective to do that. Brilliant. So that's Petersfield. That's this side of the bridge. We're going to cross over to the other side of the bridge. Even today in my research, so I've spoken to you a bit at the beginning about what I'm doing today with my research. Even today, there still seems to be this divide between Petersfield and Romsey, the other side of the bridge, the wrong side of the bridge. I've even heard one person refer it to as. And I would argue that this distinction has its roots ingrained in the railway. So again, here you can see in the top left-hand corner the extent of the railway in this picture in 1920. You can see right up behind the station at the top up here, there's a big coal loader, various, quite a lot of railway lines and all this sort of stuff. And the growth of the railway between 1845 and the 1920s attracted a whole host of railway workers to the area. So you had firemen, engine drivers, conductors, locomotive fitters, etc. It's important to mention that unlike a lot of other railway towns, at least as far as I'm aware of in England, none of these houses were built by the railway company. I think I'm correct in saying that. None of these houses were built by the railway company. They were all built under private developers. However, a majority of the people here were employed by the railway or had some local connection to the railway in some way that would go on to give this area of Cambridge, Romsey, this really distinct working class identity that would later earn it the name of Red Romsey for its role in the 1926 general strike. And there's a fantastic interview excerpt here from an M. Nicol in 1981. Red Russia, they used to call it. Over here was nearly all railway workers. You no longer see the driver walking up the street over the bridge in his smart uniform with his little black box. They were big men like the engines they drove. And in Allan Brigham's book, A Brush with the Past, he goes on to say that this collectivism and a strong sense of identity, combined with the dirty but skilled jobs in an almost rural setting, made Romsey closer in spirit to a mining community than to the traditional university market town of which it was a part. And I think that's just fantastic, to be honest. This is reflected very much in the construction of the Romsey Labour Club, which was the foundation stone was laid by Romsey MacDonald, leader of the Labour Party and Prime Minister. I'm not sure if he was Prime Minister at the time the stone was laid, but nevertheless. And this was constructed entirely with local voluntary labour, which is fantastic. So yeah, so Romsey has very much its roots ingrained in the railway. So on to the final bit now. You can see what it was by this slide. Does anybody know where this is today on this map? Where the mosque is. Yes, exactly. Where the mosque is today. So this was basically the Romsey Cement and Lime Work Company originally. So it opened in 1892 and existed until 1915. And the Romsey Town and Cement Lime Company, founded in 1892, was the first cement works in or directly abutting Cambridge and had its works where Mill Road meets Brookfields. Dillon Moore implies that the site may have started out as a coprolite mine, but it eventually developed 11 kilns with production being distributed by road as it had no rail or tram connection. Now, interestingly, on this map, I've highlighted two things. Well, there are three things of note. First, if you look up here, you can see that a large proportion of the site to the north has been excavated, and that was to extract clay and marl. I'm not too sure what the reason is for that, presumably to make local Cambridge bricks, the Cambridge white bricks. I imagine that's the reason that you... Also, that would help. That would help. You need clay to make cement. Fantastic. So you're excavating it on site, even better. You have in green at the bottom, this is where the boardroom would have been of the Town Cement and Lime Company. You would have also had presumably some sort of warehouses or something like that on the site. But most importantly, these 11 kilns that are referred to by Dylan Moore, I've highlighted those in red. And basically, from the map, it appears that these kilns are subterranean. That's what I would guess, based on the contour lines on that map. And if we look to local examples, we see this as well. So this is a lime kiln at Cherry Hinton, at the bottom of Lime Kiln Lane, very aptly named. And you essentially, from this cross-sectional diagram of a lime kiln, you can see that with these sort of subterranean kilns, you'd have layer of limestone, then coke, limestone coke, and this basically feeds itself. So you have a flame at the bottom, which burns at around 800 degrees, which is what you need to convert the limestone into quicklime. As that burns down, the layer of coke above it ignites, which then burns the layer of limestone on top of that, and so forth. So you'd have, basically, the end result will be quicklime, which is really important as a building material. You can use it in mortar, you can use it as fertilizer, and you can also use it for lime wash as well, which was quite an important thing in a lot of houses and mills and all that sort of stuff. The lime works was not successful in the grand scheme of things, and it closed in 1919, presumably because the larger Saxon and Norman lime works were located just down the road. I think the restricted nature of the site basically put it out of business. This ushers in the next phase of the development of the site, which is where it becomes the Cam Foundry. So you basically have the Macintosh iron founders. They have their premises and headquarters on Market Hill, basically where Five Guys is now. And they have their foundry at Thompson's Lane, which is near back where basically you've got Jesus Green and Magdalen College, that sort of area of town there is where this ironworks would have been. And believe it or not, that would have actually been the hotbed of industry before Mill Road came along. So the site of the first iron foundry is located now beneath the footprint of the Master's House of St. John's College, which is quite fascinating. So you'd have, so the Macintosh iron foundry moved to the site in 1923. So I've taken the footprint of the Cement Town Lime Works buildings and overlaid it directly onto the 1920 Ordnance Survey map. And you can see from this that this in green here is the footprint of the original building. They appear to add some things and then also demolish this small bit on the top there. You can see that there are 6 lime kilns left, so there are 5 of them presumably backfilled by this point. Perhaps to the north, the extent of excavations is greater by this point. And they also have a sawmill next door. And I'm not too sure whether this was whether this was also owned by Macintosh or whether this was a separate enterprise. But if I skip through this and go to, this is a mangle which is in the Museum of Cambridge. And to me, it makes perfect business sense to, if you're making smaller implements and agricultural machinery, to have the ability to create things out of iron on site, and then you also have a sawmill next door where you can combine the two things together. That's my interpretation anyway. That's yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, so if you've got the sawmill next door, you can make the rollers to put onto the machinery. So I've sort of jumped the gun a bit there. But so yeah, the Cam Foundry make mainly small things, domestic appliances, agricultural machinery and the like. But interestingly, when I was walking around, I can't remember this photo here, this sort of like stump-looking thing. I can't remember, I think it's on Catherine Street or Ross Street, one of those two. Thoday Street. Yeah, Thoday Street. I knew it was there somewhere. And this appears to be the base of either a gas lamp, I would say, or one of those stench pipes. Stench pipes. Does everybody know what a stench pipe is? Does anybody not know what a stench pipe is? Stench pipes were basically connected directly to the sewer lines to allow gases basically to escape, so that so presumably it wouldn't catch on fire, I guess, and blow up your sewers. So this I would argue that this is the last surviving tangible trace of the Cam Foundry site in this area of Mill Road, and it proves that they didn't make just small-scale stuff, they would have made bigger things out of iron as well. So after they moved here in 1923, they produced things on site themselves until 1934. However, after 1934, they make the decision to stop producing things on site, and they move to buying agricultural implements that have been built elsewhere and then bring them in, and they basically become just salespeople. And they operate on site until 1960. And after this, that's basically the end of iron founding in Cambridge. And I would also argue the end of the phase of this area of Mill Road having some connection to industry. Of course, there are things like Sinclair and Pye, which continue in the area after this phase, but that's sort of more technological electronic stuff, much more of a specialized or different form of industry to the type of stuff that I've been talking about in this presentation. So that's the actual main bit itself. I thought I'd go over a couple of sources and stuff that for some of you that I know there are quite a lot of seasoned veterans of the Mill Road History Society here, or people that are really interested in history and stuff. But I thought if you're not really interested in history, or you've not got a lot of experience with it, here are a couple of sources that I've used to find out a bit of stuff. So first, the Cambridgeshire collection. If you've not been there before, they've got a fantastic array of reference materials, newspapers, maps and plans, photographs and illustrations, and that's really your first stop shop for a lot of primary sources, if not just of Mill Road, but stuff in Cambridge and Cambridgeshire in general. You have then the Capturing Cambridge website, which if you haven't checked this out, and even if you're not interested in history, which your presence here today would suggest that you are interested in history, this is definitely worth a look. So this is powered by, the back end of it is powered by OpenStreetMaps, and it's overseen by a dedicated team at the Museum of Cambridge, and they basically conduct research through the censuses, they get historic photographs, and then they put these on a single geolocation point. And say, for example, you live on, I don't know, Sturton Street or Sleaford Road or whatever, and you want to know, who lived in my house years ago? You can zoom onto the map, click on the dot above your address, and see who would have lived there in the past. So that's a really fantastic resource. As I said before, the Mill Road History Society buildings reports, these are all stored on the Capturing Cambridge website, and because this talk has been quite a general talk, a bit of a general overview of the industrial history, these building reports are fantastic sources for real in-depth research on specific sites along the Mill Road area. The History Works website, please do go and give that a check out. Helen Weinstein has done a lot of fantastic work with local communities, specifically school children, but the website as well is really pertinent to industrial history, specifically of Petersfield and Sturton Town. So if you want to find out a bit more about the industrial history of Mill Road, this is a fantastic resource. And last but certainly not least, the Mill Road History Society have their YouTube channel. So all talks are usually recorded. This talk is being recorded, and it will go on to the History Society's YouTube channel. And they also have the Susie Oakes collection on their website as well, which is a fantastic array of photographs that basically show how Mill Road has changed throughout the 20th century. I think that's everything. Here are the sources. If anybody is interested in any specific sources that I've consulted, please do flag me down afterwards. And that is that. Thank you very much.